Charlotte Hale had always believed she knew EverMart better than anyone. As its CEO, she had built the company from a modest chain into a retail empire that touched millions of lives across the country. But when a series of troubling reports surfaced, especially from older customers, something inside her shifted. The numbers didn't lie, and the complaints were no longer isolated. Something was broken, and it ran deeper than poor service. So Charlotte made a decision, not as a CEO, but as a woman who once believed in something more. The boardroom, with its gleaming mahogany table and panoramic view of downtown Chicago, was a symbol of power. But that morning, it felt like a cage. She sat at the head, hands clasped tightly as she listened to yet another sanitized update from her regional managers. When Charlotte questioned the drop in customer satisfaction, particularly in the Chicago branch, she was met with thin excuses. The dismissiveness in David Reynolds' voice, brushing off elderly customers as more demanding, cut through her like glass. Efficiency mattered, yes, but not at the expense of humanity. The silence that followed her announcement was thick with disbelief. Undercover, as an employee. Charlotte didn't flinch. She remembered what it was like, those long shifts behind the counter, the aching feet, the fake smiles. It wasn't just a business strategy. It was a return to her roots. She needed to feel the heartbeat of EverMart again, not from spreadsheets, but from the floor. The next morning, she stepped into the Chicago store not as a CEO, but as Lottie, a new hire in a stiff uniform that scratched her skin. The air inside felt wrong, oppressive. Employees moved with robotic urgency, eyes low, lips tight. Gone was the friendly energy of retail. In its place was something colder, calculated. Steve Crawford, the store manager, greeted her with apathy. No introduction, no welcome, just a printed schedule and rules barked like commands. She wasn't late, but he said she was. And worse, he didn't seem to care. His rules weren't about order, they were about control. Charlotte's chest tightened as she watched him berate a young girl for arriving 5 minutes late. The girl's eyes glossed over, nodding silently, afraid to speak. Charlotte had expected poor leadership. What she hadn't expected was fear. At the registers, she witnessed the quiet collapse of customer service. A woman struggling at the self-checkout, a cashier barely lifting a finger. A kind request met with sharp impatience. Every act of human need was treated as a burden. When Charlotte tried to help an elderly man find a can of soup, a fellow cashier pulled her back, warning her. Helping too much meant fewer shifts. The rules were designed to punish compassion. It was Lisa who caught her attention next. The assistant manager moved with calm urgency, helping a man count his change with patience that stood in contrast to the rest of the store's rigid tempo. Charlotte had read her name in the reports. High customer praise. No promotions, just a name buried in the system. Try to keep your head down, Lisa warned softly, and those words haunted Charlotte more than any spreadsheet. Then came the crash. A display knocked over by an older man. Steve was there instantly, not to help, but to humiliate. His voice thundered through the store, shaming the man who already looked lost. No one moved, no one spoke. It was a store governed by fear, where dignity was collateral damage. Charlotte's fists clenched. This wasn't an issue of poor performance. It was a culture, systemic, corrosive, and cruel. She scanned the first item on the register as the storm swelled in her chest. Not a storm of rage, but one of sorrow and reckoning. The journey had just begun. And though she had come here undercover, what she was uncovering was a wound far deeper than she ever imagined. The question no longer was whether she could fix it, but whether she was willing to risk everything to try. Charlotte stood at the register, her mind buzzing with unease. The woman in front of her fumbled through her purse, whispering that she might have a coupon. Charlotte offered a gentle smile, her patience unwavering even as the woman's hands trembled. But just as she reached to scan the wrinkled paper, she felt it. A presence. Steve. His voice slithered into her ear, low and biting. "Move faster." Charlotte didn't flinch. She kept her expression calm, scanned the coupon, and finished the transaction with the same warmth she always carried. The woman gave her a grateful nod, entirely unaware of the power struggle taking place over her groceries. Steve lingered, his presence thick with threat, then moved down the line like a wolf patrolling his territory. The next customer, an older man, placed his cans of soup down slowly, his joints stiff with age. "Could you tell me if this one has less sodium?" he asked softly. Charlotte reached for the can, but before she could read it, a scoff came from a neighboring register. A younger cashier rolled his eyes. "It's on the label," he muttered. Not loud enough for the customer, but just enough for Charlotte to hear. She clenched her jaw, read the label, and said gently, "Yes, this one is reduced sodium." But no act of kindness went unpunished in this place. A whisper floated from beside her. "You don't have time for that?" The voice belonged to a cashier barely out of high school. "If Steve sees, he'll cut your shifts. Just scan and move on." Charlotte took a breath, trying to calm the fire rising in her chest. This was not a store focused on efficiency. It was a machine grinding down every trace of empathy. Her eyes wandered to the posted shift schedule. Red ink marked the punished. Marie, -3 hours. Josh, -2. She understood immediately. This was a warning system, a list of the disobedient. She spotted Josh soon after, 19, pale and sweating as he scrambled to fix an error at the self-checkout. Steve was on him in seconds, berating him with military precision. Josh nodded, hands trembling, voice absent. Charlotte felt sick. Then Marie, kind and efficient, helped an elderly woman lift a heavy bag. 10 seconds of compassion. Steve noticed. He called her name. 3 fewer hours next week. No argument. Just silence. Marie returned to her register, her spirit a little dimmer. When Charlotte clocked out, her body wasn't sore from work. It was sore from restraint. In the break room, she overheard Lisa's hushed voice. "I can't do another double shift." A man, her husband, maybe, responded coldly, "You don't have a choice. We need the money." Lisa's reply was hollow. "I'll talk to Steve." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Lisa, the store's backbone, wasn't just tired. She was stuck. If even she couldn't push back, what hope did anyone else have? Charlotte felt the weight of guilt pressing down. Had she unknowingly built this culture? Was this her legacy? The next morning, Charlotte entered the store as a ghost, blending in, silent and watchful. She mirrored her co-workers. Minimal words, rapid scans, no eye contact. She logged everything, every moment of hesitation, every act of suppression. Josh moved double speed again, stress etched into his young face. Lisa hustled through the aisles, pulled in 5 directions at once. Then came the next blow. Marie called in sick, flu. Steve shrugged. "Not my problem." Lisa would cover the shift. Full day. Didn't matter. She swallowed her protest and nodded. No raise, no thanks. Just a burden to bear. Charlotte's jaw ached from grinding her teeth. She'd written the very policies that were supposed to prevent this. Instead, she was watching Lisa, a star employee, being used up and discarded. The breaking point came that afternoon. An elderly man forgot his wallet. Lisa offered to hold his items. Steve erupted. "We're not a charity." He turned to the man. "Next time, bring your wallet. We don't have time for this." Silence. The man flushed with shame. Lisa froze. Charlotte burned. She wanted to scream, to tear off her disguise and reveal who she was, but she couldn't, not yet. Lisa needed her job. So did everyone else. Charlotte gripped the conveyor belt, her knuckles white. Later, Lisa pulled her aside. "Don't help people," she warned. "Steve notices. Then you lose hours. Then your job." Her eyes were dull, not from lack of care, but from knowing that caring didn't matter here. The next morning, Charlotte felt the exhaustion wrap tighter around the store. The air was heavier, the smiles more forced. She saw it in everyone's posture, in the silent way they moved. Martha, a longtime employee, stood near the break room door, pleading quietly with Steve. 10 years of service, good reviews. And still, you're not meeting efficiency. Charlotte watched her walk out with slumped shoulders, her dignity bleeding from every step. No one said a word. Then, another elderly man struggled at the self-checkout. Charlotte stepped in gently, guiding him through. It took seconds, but the chill on her neck told her Steve had seen. He didn't say anything, just watched. A few hours later, a message. "Steve wants to see you." In the office, he leaned against the desk, smug. "You're getting too comfortable." He accused her of caring, of helping, of standing out. And then, the threat. "People who stand out don't last long here." Charlotte didn't blink. Understood. By the end of her shift, she was unraveling. Her headache throbbed as she passed Lisa, locked in yet another conflict with Steve. Another shift added. Another piece of her life taken. Lisa tried to resist. She tried to say she had kids. Steve didn't care. Charlotte stepped in after he walked away. "Are you okay?" Lisa laughed, bitter. "Why do you keep asking that?" "Because it looks like you're not." Lisa turned, eyes glassy. "Steve isn't just a manager. He controls everything. You push, you lose hours, you keep pushing, you're out." Then she walked away. Charlotte didn't follow. Not yet. She stood still, fists clenched, her heart hammering. Enough was enough. She had waited. She had watched. Now it was time to act. Charlotte had thought she had seen the worst of Steve's power plays, but that morning shattered any illusions she had left. It started with one of Steve's infamous impromptu meetings, designed not to inform, but to intimidate. Employees gathered in a loose semicircle near the registers, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. Charlotte blended into the back, her gaze fixed on Lisa, who stood at the center like a lamb before the butcher. Steve paced like a warden inspecting prisoners. "There's a problem in this store," he announced, his voice carrying like a threat. "Some of you think you can make your own rules, pick and choose when to follow orders." His eyes locked on Lisa. "You have a real problem with that, don't you?" Lisa's jaw twitched, but she said nothing. Steve stepped closer, arms crossed. "I asked you to cover the night shift. You said no, that's not how this works." "I already worked a full shift," Lisa replied, voice even but strained. "This is retail," he snapped. "We all work extra when needed." Lisa's hands curled into fists at her sides. Steve didn't stop. "You don't want to stay late? Fine, I'll find someone else permanently." The words hit like a thunderclap. No one spoke. No one dared. Lisa's shoulders stiffened. No protest, just a nod, drained of emotion. This wasn't leadership. This was public execution, humiliation disguised as authority. Steve clapped his hands. "That's all, get to work." Employees scattered like prey. Lisa turned toward the break room, her steps slow, fragile. Charlotte wanted to go to her, but she caught Steve watching, his eyes narrowing, calculating. She turned away, forced her breath steady. The time for watching was over. Lisa was next. If Charlotte didn't act, Lisa would be gone, just like Martha. Charlotte began gathering evidence. Quietly, carefully. Conversations near the break room, whispers by the shelves. That's how she learned the truth. "You ever notice complaints just vanish?" a cashier named Rachel asked. Charlotte leaned in. "What do you mean?" Rachel glanced around. Josh filed one last year. A week later, his hours were halved. It clicked. This wasn't just a bad manager. Steve had protection. If HR wasn't responding, someone up the chain was complicit. And that meant Charlotte needed more than anecdotes. She needed proof. That night, she slipped a small recorder into her pocket. She documented everything. Steve slashing hours without cause, barking threats, manipulating schedules. Each moment captured like a puzzle piece. Then came the breaking point. Josh, overworked and terrified, was fumbling at the register. Steve swooped in, cold and smug. "Clock out," he said. Josh blinked, panic setting in. "Wait, I need this job." "Should have worked faster." Josh stood frozen. Then slowly, defeated, removed his name tag. Lisa watched from a distance, her face drained of color. No one said a word. That's how Steve thrived. On silence. Charlotte clenched her fists behind the counter. This was a system built on fear, and she was going to be the one to break it. She sought out Martha during break. The older woman sat alone, stirring a cup of cold coffee. Charlotte joined her, voice low. "I heard what happened." Martha laughed bitterly. "Which part?" "The part where a decade of loyalty meant nothing." Martha shook her head. "Steve always gets his way." "Did you report him?" "Once." She paused. No response. "Then my hours got cut. A month later, I was out." Charlotte leaned back, mind racing. This wasn't neglect. It was protection, active, deliberate. That night she logged into the employee portal, searched for complaints. There were none, not one against Steve. Other stores? Plenty. But here, it was like nothing bad had ever happened. It had all been erased. The next day, Steve was already seething. He targeted Lisa again, accusing her of not logging inventory. "I worked 2 shifts back to back," she said. Steve sneered. "Not my problem." Charlotte stepped forward. "She did log the shipments. I saw her." Steve turned, eyes narrowed. "You sure are paying attention to things that don't concern you." "Just doing my job." He held her gaze, then walked away. Lisa exhaled beside her. "You didn't have to do that." "I did." Lisa hesitated. "Why are you really here?" Charlotte's heart skipped. For a second, she thought she was caught. But Lisa added, "You act like you care." "That's not normal." "Maybe normal is the problem." Lisa gave a weary laugh. Then Charlotte saw it, an email, flash across the office computer. The sender, Richard Calloway, regional director. If he was messaging Steve, this rabbit hole went deeper than she feared. She started playing the long game, getting Steve to incriminate himself. Another staff meeting, another chance. "You think your hours are guaranteed?" Steve barked. "If I don't see improvement, shifts will be cut. Don't like it? There's the door." No one replied. Fear had bound them all. Charlotte captured every word. Later that night, she checked the schedule. Names slashed to part-time. The retaliation had already begun. But now, Charlotte wasn't just a CEO in disguise. She was a witness. And the storm she was preparing to unleash would be unlike anything EverMart had seen. Charlotte had expected Steve's downfall to be slow, unraveling piece by piece. But what came next was like watching a dam begin to crack under the pressure. She had taken the risk of accessing the complaint system herself. As expected, there was no trace of any active or past complaints against Steve. The system had been scrubbed clean. But before she could go further, a shadow loomed behind her. "Looking for something?" Steve's voice was calm, but every word was laced with suspicion. Charlotte turned, forcing a smile. "Just checking my schedule." He didn't blink. "You ask a lot of questions for someone new." She shrugged. "I like knowing what I'm walking into." Steve stepped closer, the air tightening. "Funny, it almost seems like you're trying to stir things up." Charlotte met his gaze. "I just work here." They stood locked in silence for a heartbeat. Then Steve smirked. "Clock out." As Charlotte walked past him, she kept her pace steady, but her pulse was a storm. He knew something, and he was closing in. The next day, Lisa pulled her aside. Her voice was low and raw. "I can't do this anymore. I'm done." Charlotte kept her expression neutral. "You're leaving?" Lisa rubbed her temples. "I don't have a choice." He's doing it on purpose. Every shift is another test to see how far he can break me. Charlotte inhaled slowly. She couldn't reveal everything. Not yet. Just hold on a little longer. Lisa's eyes narrowed. For what? What are you even trying to do? Charlotte hesitated. Lisa stepped back. You're playing a dangerous game, Lottie, and I don't think you understand how this ends. She turned and walked away, leaving Charlotte rooted in place, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. But Charlotte did understand how it ended, and she was about to make sure it ended on her terms. She set the trap. That afternoon, a man entered the store, older, uncertain, and slow in his steps. Charlotte recognized him immediately. He approached the register and fumbled through his pockets. I think I left my wallet at home," he said, voice trembling. "I live just down the street." Charlotte looked to Steve, who was already watching from the front. The man tried to explain further, but Steve interrupted, storming forward. "We're not holding up the line for you. Either you pay or you leave." Charlotte stayed quiet, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the register. The cameras were rolling. Employees had started watching, and she was recording everything. The man stammered, helpless. I don't care," Steve snapped. "Get out!" Silence. The old man turned and walked away, humiliated. Charlotte felt the shift. Steve didn't realize it yet, but everything had changed. That night, Charlotte sat in her car, the streetlight casting long shadows across the dashboard. Her fingers trembled as she composed the email. "To whom it may concern. There is serious misconduct occurring at the EverMart Chicago branch. Employees are threatened, hours are cut as punishment, and customers, especially the elderly, are treated with hostility. Attached are audio recordings verifying these claims. Immediate action is required. Anonymous." She hit send. But that wasn't all. She forwarded the same message anonymously to several employees, those who had suffered the worst under Steve. She didn't know who would speak up, but she only needed one. The next morning, something felt different. The air inside the store was thick with tension. Employees moved more cautiously. Eyes darted to the corners. Something was brewing, and Steve knew it. He prowled the floor, no longer smug, but simmering. Lisa stood near the stockroom, her face drawn. Charlotte approached. "You okay?" Lisa shook her head. "Something's happening. I heard Steve talking to Calloway. Someone reported him." Charlotte's pulse quickened. "That's good, right?" Lisa didn't answer. Her voice was grim. "He's angry. More than usual. He knows someone's coming for him. And that scares me more than anything." Charlotte felt the warning beneath her words. Lisa's tone sharpened. "Whoever did this, they better know what they've started." Charlotte kept her voice even. "Maybe this is the push we need." Lisa's laugh was hollow. "We? There is no we. I've spent years surviving in this place. You show up and suddenly it's a revolution?" Charlotte swallowed hard. "You hate it here." "Yeah, I do, but I also need this job." She turned and walked away. Then came Steve's retaliation. A call rang out over the store intercom. Mandatory meeting at the front. Employees shuffled forward, their nerves on edge. Steve stood tall, arms crossed. "I got a call today," he began. "Seems someone thinks I'm not doing my job." The group shifted uneasily. "So let's be clear. You try to come for me, you better be ready for what's next." He turned to Lisa. "Effective immediately. Hours are being reduced." Gasps and murmurs spread. Steve raised a hand. "Problem with that?" "There's the door." Then he looked at Lisa. "Tired of your attitude. You want to stay? Prove your loyalty." Lisa stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Tell me who's been stirring the pot." The room held its breath. Charlotte felt her chest tighten. This was it. Lisa could turn her in right now. Lisa inhaled, then slowly, "I don't know anything." Steve's face darkened. "Fine, Pick up your last check on Friday." Charlotte's stomach dropped. Lisa didn't flinch, but her hands trembled. Steve dismissed them. The crowd dispersed. Charlotte followed Lisa into the stockroom. "What now?" Lisa asked. Charlotte didn't hesitate. "We fight." Lisa laughed. "And how do you plan on doing that?" "By ending him." Charlotte stood near customer service, the plan in motion. Everything had to be public. It had to be undeniable. At 4:15 p.m., an elderly man walked in, small basket in hand, slow steps, eyes scanning the aisles. Lisa noticed him too. Then, he reached the register and fumbled with his wallet. Charlotte felt the energy shift. It was time. The man at the register patted his pockets, confusion flickering across his face. "Oh, I think I left my credit card in the car," he said, his tone apologetic. Charlotte watched as Steve's gaze locked onto the man, his eyes already narrowing. The customer turned to Lisa. "I can grab it real quick. Would you mind holding these for me?" Lisa began to nod, instinctively kind, but Steve stepped forward like a thunderclap. "No," he snapped. The man blinked, startled. You don't have your money. You don't get your groceries. That's how it works." Lisa bristled. "Steve, it's not a big deal. He'll be right back." "I don't care," Steve barked, his voice escalating. "We're not running a charity." Charlotte felt the air change. Customers were turning, eyes narrowing, phones quietly raised. Employees froze, sensing something dangerous was happening. The man shrank in on himself, cheeks reddening with embarrassment. Get out," Steve shouted. "We don't have time for people like you slowing down the store." Silence stretched across the front end like a heavy fog. Then, Charlotte saw it. A hand rising. A phone lifted. Someone was filming. Steve didn't notice. He was too busy glaring at Lisa. "Throw him out," he ordered. Lisa looked like she'd been slapped. "What? You heard me. Either you do it, or you can find another job." Charlotte could see the storm behind Lisa's eyes, her breath catching. Then something shifted. Lisa straightened. "Sir," she said, turning to the man, "take your time. Your groceries will be right here when you get back." Steve's face twisted. "Lisa, I'm not throwing him out." And then it happened. Steve shoved her. It wasn't hard, but it was enough. Enough for Lisa to stumble. Enough to draw gasps from every corner of the store. Enough for every phone camera to catch. Then, the silence shattered. "Hey, you can't do that. Call the cops." Charlotte stepped forward, her hand lifting to her chest. She unpinned her name tag and placed it firmly on the counter. "I think that's enough." Steve turned, his color draining. Charlotte met his gaze. "I'm Charlotte Hale, CEO of EverMart." A stunned hush swept over the store. Steve stammered, his voice a whisper. "What?" "I've been here for weeks," Charlotte said. "Watching, recording, listening, and now we all just saw exactly who you are." He said nothing. Could say nothing. Security arrived. Steve was escorted out, his face pale, sweat glistening at his temple. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He knew. His reign was over. But Charlotte knew this wasn't victory. This was only the surface. Later that day, a corporate investigator arrived, stoic, polite, clipboard in hand. He asked questions, reviewed files, nodded at employee accounts. But it wasn't the investigator Charlotte was watching. It was the whispers, the nervous glances, the employees who wondered if this really meant change. Near the break room, Lisa approached. "What now?" Charlotte exhaled. "They'll review. They'll clean up." Lisa's brow furrowed. "And then?" "That depends on who's really in charge." She didn't have to wait long. "Charlotte Hale." She turned. Richard Calloway, Regional Director, the man who had signed off on Steve's decisions, whose name appeared in every suspicious email. He wore confidence like armor. "We should talk," he said. In the office, he gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I assume you know what's going on," he said calmly. You tell me. Steve was reckless. You did the right thing. But let's not make this a bigger mess than it has to be. Charlotte's voice was ice. You're worried about a spectacle. We both know what's at stake. Steve's gone. That's what matters. We handle the rest internally. She laughed, bitter and sharp. By handle, you mean bury. Calloway didn't flinch. This company has a reputation. So do you. You've worked hard to get here. Why blow it all up? He leaned forward. You want to fix this? Fine. Bring in a new manager. Tighten policies. Move on. Charlotte stared. Why protect him? Calloway exhaled. It's not about Steve. It's about the system. He followed policies. Sure, he pushed boundaries. But that store was profitable. She felt the words sink like lead. At what cost? That's the question, isn't it? Later, in the corporate boardroom, Charlotte sat surrounded by executives. Not one of them had ever stood behind a register. They weren't concerned about truth. Only about stock prices, headlines, control. This needs to be handled carefully, one said. We can't afford a scandal. Another executive pushed a report across the table. An internal audit. One she had never seen. Her heart dropped. Steve wasn't an anomaly. He was the norm. Dozens of managers, multiple stores, complaints, intimidation, fear-based control. She looked up. What do you expect me to do with this? Do what's best for EverMart. Charlotte felt the weight pressed down. She could walk away, keep her title, let them pin it all on Steve. Clean and quiet. Or she could burn it down. That night in her office, she stared at her screen. The audit report open, dozens of deleted complaints, stories erased, whistleblowers silenced. This wasn't a broken branch. It was a poisoned root. And now, Charlotte had to decide. Protect the company, or protect the people who made it run. Her cursor hovered over the send button. This time, there would be no turning back. The silence of the screen felt heavier than Charlotte had imagined. The audit results sat in front of her, hard proof that the abuse within EverMart was not isolated. Managers like Steve Crawford had not just slipped through the cracks. They had been shielded, protected, empowered. Every complaint, every brave voice that had dared speak out, had been buried before ever reaching corporate's radar. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't about one man. It was about a culture, a systemic sickness rooted deep in the very policies she once helped build. But data alone wasn't enough. She needed something more. A human face, a story, a voice that would cut through boardroom indifference. She needed Lisa. Lisa sat across from her now, arms folded tightly, her jaw set like steel. The exhaustion in her eyes said everything. You want me to testify? She asked flatly. Charlotte nodded. I need someone who's lived it. Someone who's not just a statistic. Lisa's laugh was bitter. And then what? What happens to me? Charlotte was silent. Then she spoke the only truth she could. I don't know. Lisa's head dropped back. That's not very reassuring. But I do know this, Charlotte said, leaning forward. If you don't say something, nothing will change. The next Lisa will go through this, and the one after that. Lisa stared at her, silent. You once told me this place was broken. Well, now we have a chance to fix it, but I can't do it alone. For a long moment, Lisa said nothing. Then, finally, she exhaled. Fine, I'll do it. Relief washed over Charlotte like a flood. Thank you. Lisa gave a small, tired smile. You better make it count. The next morning, Charlotte stood at the head of the boardroom table. Around her sat EverMart's most powerful executives, polished, impatient, and utterly disconnected. Richard Calloway leaned back, hands steepled. This meeting better be worth our time. Charlotte didn't flinch. She placed a thick folder on the table. It is. She locked eyes with each of them. For years, employees have reported abuse. Managers cutting hours as punishment, using fear as control, intimidating their teams into silence. And for years, those reports were deleted. She flipped open the folder. Here's the proof. Some leaned in. Others shifted, already uncomfortable. The complaint system was compromised. Certain regional directors, specifically those tied to Steve Crawford, deleted reports before they could ever reach corporate. These managers weren't overlooked. They were protected. Gasps and muttered curses passed through the room. Charlotte turned to a large screen. One click, and the evidence appeared. Deleted complaints, time-stamped, employee names. It was irrefutable. Then she pressed play. Lisa's face filled the screen, her voice steady, unshaking. My name is Lisa Martinez. I worked under Steve Crawford. I saw employees punished for speaking up. I stayed silent too long. The room went still. Charlotte turned back to the board. We have two options. We can pretend this doesn't exist until someone else exposes it, or we can fix it now, publicly, permanently. The murmurs grew louder. Some executives looked shaken, but not all. One woman, gray-haired with clear eyes, leaned forward. And what are you proposing? Charlotte didn't hesitate. We fire every regional director involved. We rebuild the complaint system so reports can't be deleted without executive review. We implement clear policies protecting employees from retaliation, and we make those policies public. Silence. Then Calloway spoke, his tone colder now. And if we don't? Charlotte met his gaze head-on. Then I go to the press. Gasps echoed. One executive even chuckled nervously. You're bluffing. I'm not. Calloway shook his head. You're playing a dangerous game. No, Charlotte said. I'm ending one. Tension gripped the room like a vice. Then, slowly, the tide shifted. I support her, said the gray-haired woman. Another voice followed, then another. The board wasn't unanimous, but the momentum had changed. Calloway sat back, expression dark. Charlotte saw the battle wasn't over, but for now, she had won the room. As she stood there, palms flat on the polished table, facing a company she had helped build, she knew the war was far from over. But for the first time, the silence had broken, and it would never return to the way it was again. The boardroom had fallen into a stunned silence. Charlotte had laid the proof on the table. Emails, deleted records, and Lisa's testimony. The evidence was undeniable. And yet, the quiet that followed echoed like judgment. Richard Calloway leaned back, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. But his voice? Smug. This is reckless, he said. Charlotte, I've known you for years. I respect your work, but you're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Charlotte didn't blink. I'm letting facts guide my judgment. You saw the data, complaints buried, reports deleted, and employees sacrificed for profit. We fix it or we cover it up. Calloway sighed, dismissive. You say fix it, but you mean tearing the foundation apart. EverMart won't survive a scandal like this. Stockholders won't stand by. Some murmured agreement. Charlotte's hands balled into fists. EverMart survives, she said, if we prove we're willing to hold ourselves accountable. Calloway scoffed, spoken like an idealist. Charlotte's eyes sharpened. No, spoken like a leader. That was when she saw it. The shift. Steve had been the beginning, but Calloway was the root. The architect of a system built to protect itself, to punish truth, to reward silence. Calloway turned to Lisa. Lisa Martinez, right? Lisa nodded cautiously. What you're saying could hurt a lot of good people. You understand that, yes? Lisa's hands gripped the chair arms. I understand that if we don't do something, it never stops. Calloway smiled thinly. You've had some issues, haven't you? Scheduling problems, discipline reports. Are you sure you're the most reliable voice? Charlotte stepped in. Are you seriously threatening an employee? Just asking questions, he said. But Lisa straightened. I worked under Steve for years. I saw him punish people. I saw him break them. I stayed quiet. I won't anymore. For the first time, Calloway faltered. Charlotte stepped forward. We have a chance to show our people they matter, or we show them they don't. An executive spoke. She's right. If we bury this, it only grows. Then Calloway made his move. He slid a document across the table. A vote of no confidence. Charlotte froze. You keep pushing, he said. You lose everything. She scanned the faces, some sympathetic, others hesitant. Calloway had prepared for this, but so had she. Charlotte lifted her voice. We've seen the truth. Steve wasn't alone. He was protected, enabled. This system was designed to suppress and silence. She reached into a second folder and pulled out internal emails. Calloway ordered deletions. He instructed retaliation. This isn't speculation. It's fact. Gasps. Papers passed from hand to hand. This is survival, she said. This is leadership? Lisa nodded, tears brimming but unfallen. I move for a vote, said a quiet voice. Hands lifted. Calloway paled. A board member announced, effective immediately. Richard Calloway is suspended pending investigation. Calloway stood, shaking. You'll regret this. Charlotte didn't flinch. Security escorted him out. Lisa joined her. So that's it? Charlotte exhaled. For him, yes. For EverMart? We rebuild. Morning headlines blazed across the internet. EverMart scandal. CEO Charlotte Hale cleans house. Whistleblowers expose systemic abuse. Calloway was gone. Others were under investigation. Employees who had been silenced were speaking again. Charlotte turned to her next battle. Restructuring from the inside. New complaint systems, anonymous audits, manager accountability tied to worker satisfaction. She walked into the Chicago store. Everything felt lighter. Lisa stood confidently at the front desk, fielding questions, smiling. Charlotte offered her the position of store manager. You care, she said. You know what's broken. Help me fix it. Lisa hesitated. Then, I'll do it. And in that moment, Charlotte saw the beginning of change. Later, in her office, Charlotte outlined new reforms: mandatory ethics training, anonymous quarterly surveys, external complaint oversight, and transparency tied to executive bonuses. She picked up the phone. We're going public with this, full transparency, no spin. Are you sure? The voice asked. Good, she said. Let them watch. Charlotte Hale didn't just expose corruption. She proved that leadership isn't about power, it's about responsibility. Real change is painful, it's slow, but it begins with one decision: to fight. Because if no one does, the cycle never ends. Charlotte Hale made her choice, and the world watched as EverMart was reborn. Not perfect, but finally honest.